Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox. In this special 5-part podcast series, we are considering the presidents of the Republic of Texas and leadership lessons we may draw therefrom. In this episode, we look at the administration of Sam Houston during his second term. Our continued exploration of the presidents of the Republic of Texas. In this episode, we're going to take up the second term of Sam Houston. Don, at the end of the last episode, you talked about some of the situations that Mirabeau B. Lamar left Sam Houston. You want to pick it up from having an army, having a navy, and being broke?
Yeah, so the Republic of Texas is in dire straits. It is going to go into complete default and economic collapse. You can't get any financial backing to speak of. There's lots of attempts, but there's not a lot of people buying into the Texas dream. Most Texans are still wanting to be Americans and not Texans. There's a simmering feud between Mexico and Texas. The Indians are all outraged. Sam Houston has to essentially go through his inbox and try to fix everything. First things first, get rid of that stupid Navy. Calls it all in, puts it up in stocks. Some people come in and repossess some of the boats, or at least put a lien on them. Most of them just sit it out, tied up to a wharf somewhere. Okay, so took care of that. The Army he's about to furlough it, but the public will is saying, look, Mexico's just invaded us a number of times. We need to strike back. So Sam Houston looks around and says, all right, Alexander Somerville, what are you doing? Well, I'm doing Army stuff. Great, I need you to lead a punitive expedition against Mexico, but do it on the cheap, if you wouldn't mind. So Somerville says, great, where do you want me to go? I said, go down to Laredo and tell those knuckleheads they're actually part of the Republic, and then we'll call it good. So Somerville does his expedition slowly and without a whole lot of fanfare, gets down to the Texas-Mexico border to Laredo and beyond, and then declares victory and says, all right, now we go home. There's a subset in that group that's going, what do you mean declaring victory? The Mexicans were in San Antonio. The Mexicans actually arrested Samuel Maverick, and they were at the Alamo. They occupied the Alamo and stuff. This isn't over. Somerville says, no, it's over, because he's understanding how much money he's spending and how it's supposed to be done on the cheap. So a bunch of them continue on, and they head all the way down to the little Mexican town of Mier. And at Mier, they decide to hold it for ransom, just like Warfield had done in Mora up in New Mexico. And what they do is they get tricked by the locals who say, a couple of days we'll have your money. So they stick around. And that gives the Mexican forces time to rally and react. And the fight at Mier is a disaster for this little band of freelance Texans. And they get hauled off into captivity. They make a break for it. They get rounded up again. Mexicans shoot 1 out of 10, when what becomes known as the Black Bean Incident. So Sam Houston is just trying to make that Mexico border war goal. That means he's got to have negotiated peace. He can't have negotiated peace unless he gets a broker. Mexicans don't trust the U.S., so he asks for the British. And that'll have a twofold purpose. If he's starting to suck up to the British, then the Americans will start thinking more and more about annexation. So the British say, we'll broker a peace between Mexico and you. And Sam Houston goes to the United States and says, hey, y'all hear that? The British are willing to work with us. Y'all remember the British. So that's his play against Mexico. Now what about the Comanches? Because they're pretty miffed. I think that's an ancient Comanche word for furious. And the way that he deals with the Comanches is essentially to militarize the Texas Rangers. So the Rangers were originally a defensive group in 1823. They become a paramilitary in the early part of the Republic. And then Sam Houston says, no, we're going to have regular officers. And what we'll do is we'll have officers that are on the payroll. And then what they will do is they will fill out their with volunteers that are providing their own weapons and stuff, and we'll figure out how to settle up with them later. So that's where you start seeing people like Samuel Walker, people like Jack Hayes. These guys start showing up, and they begin the regularization, the professionalization of the Rangers as a quasi-military force to essentially skirmish with the Comanche. So he's managed to do it. Sam Houston is masterful. He's managed to do it. Navy, check. Mexico, check. Indians, check. It was still not annexed. That's what he's got to fix.
Before we move to annexation and tell that story, could you say a few words about the immigration policy of really all of the Texas presidents, or what was the immigration status of Americans or others moving to the then Republic of Texas?
They were certainly welcome to come, and land was plentiful, and that land was cheap, and they had the Texas General Land Office, so you could be secure in your papers. Anybody that had fought during the Texas Revolution got to go survey anywhere they wanted to. So there wasn't a whole lot of concern about immigration from the United States. And there's a lot of people chomping at the bit to move to Texas, but they're not quite sure if Texas will be the place for them. So it's not like there's a land rush, because Texas is still a big question mark. Where the money is and where the energy is in the plantation South. And there are some people interested in Texas, but until they get it sorted out, they're not going. Because one question mark is, if Texas is not annexed and Texas becomes a satellite of the British Empire, will require slavery to be abolished. So if you're in Georgia and you're thinking about moving your next plantation operation to East Texas, you're going to wait to see how all this plays out. So as much as people like to think that slavery is driving this story, it's not driving the story yet. You have to have the protection of the American flag before you'll feel protected in bringing your enslaved people into Texas. So.
Is this really the time of the Republic? Is it before the sort of explosion of growth of the port of Galveston?
Yes, absolutely. So really it's the port of Indianola. Port of Galveston is blocked by Houston. So if you go to Galveston, sooner or later you got to go through Houston. That's the way it is today. So Indianola is really the big port in the Republic of Texas, period. Galveston is shallow. They haven't done a whole lot of improvements. And once you're there, you're on a sandbar. Indianola gives you the gateway to Matagorda. Matagorda gives you the gateway to San Antonio, gives you the gateway to the San Antonio River Valley, the Guadalupe River Valley. So Germans start showing up during the Republic of Texas period, and they follow that Guadalupe right up to places like New Braunfels, Fredericksburg, places like where we're sitting now. So there is some foreign immigration going on during the Republic of Texas, because the Republic of Texas needs. At the beginning of the Republic, there's only 40,000 people here. And what's remarkable is the legislature of the Republic of Texas claims the western boundary at the Rio Grande to begin with, and then deep into northern Mexico, a second impulse, and then all the way to the Pacific Ocean. So Texas has no shortage of ambition, but they're very short on people to pull it off. And so they are desperate to get people here. Very favorable land policies, but the ones that are going to make the big difference will not come until the 1850s. And that's when the plantation South shows up and says, now Texas is the next frontier. So it's the 1850s is really the big slave decade of Texas history. It's not really the Republic. Does it exist? Absolutely. But is it robust? Is it leaning into the future? Not like it is in the 1850s.
So let's move on to annexation, because President Tyler made clear he wanted to annex Texas.
You bet.
And he was unable to. Could you tell us the annexation story?
Absolutely. And it's not just President Tyler, it's President Jackson, it's President Monroe, it's President Jefferson, all the way back to the Louisiana Purchase. There is this idea that since the French had kicked around in Texas, Texas was probably part of the Louisiana Purchase. So there's some people that refer to the annexation of Texas as the re-annexation of Texas. Now, that's some interesting claims that don't really stick, especially after the 1819 Transcontinental Treaty, the Adams-Onis Treaty. So Tyler's looking at this Republican being. It's right there. He can see it. Everybody can see it. There's some European powers that are sending trade delegations, diplomatic delegations, especially the French. But the Americans are not real sure about Texas because it brings with it a lot of liabilities. So if you annex Texas, you're going to have a fight with Mexico. And Mexico's very clear about that. Y'all do it, we're coming for you. Okay. Mexico's pretty robust on paper. All right. Second big issue is, where's the back of Texas? If you're going to buy a ranch, you go and find the corners. Nobody knows where the corners are on this place. And if you're an abolitionist, you're looking at that going, holy cannoli. That's in land area about the size of 7 different states. And if they're all slave states, all of a sudden slavery is going to have a new burst of vigor, and we won't be able to contain it. So abolitionists are going, you cannot annex Texas because that'll do nothing but energize slavery. And one of the biggest critics is John Quincy Adams. He's a huge critic of Texas. What's interesting in this debate is the congressional delegation from Massachusetts stands up, pounds their fist on the desk saying, we will absolutely secede. New England will secede. Massachusetts will, if you annex Texas. Delegation from South Carolina stands up, pounds the desk, and says, great, we'd rather have Texas than Massachusetts anyway. And so that's the acrimony that's going on in Congress. Tyler's going, there's no way we're going to get any sort of accord on getting Texas annexed. So what are some other functions? Well, we can do a treaty of annexation. Maybe that'll do it, but it still has to be ratified by the Senate, and the Senate is deeply divided. So ultimately, he can't come up with a real plan other than essentially a declaration of a joint session of Congress, because you don't have to have 2/3 of the vote. You just have to have a simple majority. And so he goes down the list of strong legal arguments to weak legal arguments, and he has to settle on option 3, which is a joint declaration by Congress that annexation has occurred. Now what's interesting is you have a vote in Texas on will Texas accept this annexation. And overwhelmingly they did. Absolutely they did. Even Lamar votes for it. So wait, we thought Lamar was an imperialist. We thought he was looking at a future of Texas. When he saw Sam Houston start to flirt with Great Britain, he said, you know what? If we go that route, slavery will be illegal in Texas. Slavery's the future of this state in terms of just sheer revenue and economic power. So I'm going to go with the annexation party. So it's an overwhelming vote, 9-1 in favor of annexation. In the United States, it's a little closer. And the Democrats, by and large, Southern Democrats are for it. Northern Democrats kind of split. Whigs, Southern Whigs for it, Northern Whigs foursquare against. This begins the unraveling of the Whig Party, and which will lead to implications in the 1850s for national politics. So it's a near-run deal in Congress. But in Texas, man, they couldn't get annexed fast enough.
So could you go over some of the unique terms of the annexation? So, for instance, Texas got to keep its public lands.
Yeah.
And the United States made certain other concessions.
Yeah, so that's a huge one. That's probably the most important part of this annexation story, is that Texas gets to keep its public lands. Now, the issue is, how far do those public lands extend? And Texas, as soon as this is all getting up and running, they've got people in Santa Fe, Albuquerque, El Paso, and in Presidio, of all places, trying to organize counties before this annexation so that they can absolutely stick a pin in that territory. But Texas gets to keep its public lands, which is huge, and will end up becoming just a bottomless pit of wealth for Texas, especially once the petroleum gets discovered on some of these territories that otherwise would have been surrendered to the federal government. So that's huge. There's some mythology that comes from all this too. One is that Texas retained the right to secede, and that is not correct. They did not retain the right to secede. They retained the right to divide into multiple states at some future date. The other one is Texas is the only state that can fly its flag at the same level as the United States. Actually, if you take a look at flag code, any state can do it. Just other states don't care. Texans do. But on the other side, the United States assumes the Texas public debt. And so they're having to pay off Texas's student loans, which is a big part of this marriage. So they decide to marry each other. Some people quip that Texas annexed the United States, but the United States there's a bill that's come due. And so what they are able to do is they essentially amortize this along with the rest of the public debt, but they're also going to say you do have some land that you could swap for this debt. And it's the lovely state, the land of enchantment, New Mexico.
So we're moving towards the end of this podcast and Sam Houston's second tenure. Was there anything else you'd like to highlight from his second term as president?
He put everything back on an even keel and finally pulled it off. And Tyler doesn't get it done, but Polk does. So Tyler sets it up, Polk lands the fish, and Texas is annexed. And it is officially ceased to exist as a republic in the first month of 1846. So the plebiscite's in December 45. Everything's signed, sealed, delivered 46. By then, Sam Houston's out of office, and he's replaced by Anson Jones.
And we're going to take up President Jones in our next podcast. Don, thank you again for taking the time to visit with me.
You bet.
This is Tom Fox again. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of a special series on presidents of the Republic of Texas. Please join us again next time where we take up Sam Houston's second term as president. I hope you will subscribe, rate, and review to Leadership Lessons from Presidents, and hope you will listen to us again.